Hello, everyone. We'll give everyone a chance to get their audio going and get all set. Thank you all so much for joining us today. This is our Curious About Careers panel, learning about careers in sexual assault advocacy and response and reproductive justice. My name is Tony Phelan. I use she, her pronouns. I work in career exploration and alumni engagement, and we've got a great panel here for you all today. I'm going to put their bios in the chat in just a second in case you haven't had a chance to read through those. But I am going to kind of take a step back, and we're going to have a really awesome student moderator moderating our panel today. So I'll turn it over to Fia now and say, take it away, Fia.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here. A special thank you to our panelists for taking the time. I'm Thea, I use she, her. I'm a sophomore philosophy major and a sexy trainer, which is why I'm very interested in this work. Just a few housekeeping things before we jump in. As you can see, this meeting's being recorded. That's just so it's like a tool for students to go and look at later. But if for whatever reason you don't want your video on or whatever, that's totally fine. Feel free to also make your name anonymous in any way. Additionally, a bit of a content warning. We are going to be talking about sexual violence prevention work and maybe other types of violence. So just keep that in mind. Again, take care of yourself, do what you need to do to be here, or step away, whatever makes the most sense for you. Let's see, anything else? Checking my notes. Okay, also panelists, I think basically all the questions are for all of you. So feel free to just like jump in when you want to and add whatever you want. It's going to be sort of standard Q&A, and then at the end, we'll open it up to audience questions. Feel free to just unmute yourself when the time comes, or you can also send questions to myself or Tony, and I can ask them for you. Does that all sound good to everyone? Okay, awesome. Then let's get into it. Maybe the panelists could just start by introducing themselves and talking a little bit about what they're doing and what their work is. Maybe Emma can start.
Sure. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. Really nice to see so many people interested in this work. So my name's Emma Cohen. I use she, her, hers pronouns, class of 2012. And I right now work for the Boston Public Health Commission in Boston, Massachusetts, in their Division of Violence Prevention, leading professional development trainings for folks who are working with survivors of violence around racial equity and trauma-informed care. So I used to be a direct service provider in the rape crisis world. I was a trauma counselor, worked the hotline, trained volunteers for several years, and now I'm a step back from the front lines, training the providers to be more trauma informed and with a health equity lens. And I'll leave it at that.
You all can just feel free to unmute yourselves and talk. I won't do a whole like call anything.
All right, I can go. Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth. I use she, her pronouns. I graduated in 2017. Now I am a grad student at the Silberman School of Social Work, which is in New York City. I'm doing my professional seminar paper, which is like fancy word for a capstone, essentially, on institutional betrayal in the context of sexual assault on college campuses. So this is a topic that I'm very passionate about. Before that, I did oppositional research for Planned Parenthood. So basically, like, it was my job to know what all of the right alt people were saying about abortion, reproductive justice, anything that they could put into the ether that would put Planned Parenthood's like reputation, like media reputation, in danger. It was kind of my job to like flag that and take that down. So I know a lot about both sides of the discourse. And other than that, I am planning on attending law school next year. We'll see if I chicken out, but yeah, that's me.
So I can go next. I'm Joe Borbell. I use he, him pronouns. I work at the University of Minnesota in the Title IX office there. Our office is called the Office of Equal Opportunity and Affirmative Action. So we investigate or respond to and address concerns that come up at the university that have to do with sexual misconduct, whether it's students or employees. And then we look at reports having to do with employees of discrimination or discriminatory harassment as well. And so we're 12-person office, and 11 of us are attorneys. We have backgrounds as attorneys. So after graduating from Macalester, I think I spent a year working through AmeriCorps, and then went to law school and practiced law for a little bit before coming to the University of Minnesota. And that's where I've been for the past 4 years or so.
I can go. I'm Andrea Johnson. I use she, her pronouns. I am a graduate from Macalester in 2006. I was a French and political science major. And I also, like some of the others, went to law school and graduated in 2012. I am now working at the National Women's Law Center, which for those who are not familiar with the Law Center, we're located in DC, but I personally work all over the country because my role is Director of State Policy. And we're a nonprofit that fights for gender justice through the courts, through public policy, and just through like culture and narrative change. And we really focus on women of color, LGBTQ people, and those who are working in low-wage jobs. And most of my work, I sit on our workplace justice team, and I do a lot focused around workplace harassment, specifically sexual harassment and assault in the workplace, and what we can do to strengthen our laws to prevent that. But I also work closely with our education team that sounds like work on a lot of the issues that others who've referenced Title IX work on. So trying to prevent sexual harassment and assault in schools, and not just higher ed, but also K through 12. And then we also have a reproductive rights and health team that work a lot on the other topic for this conversation, reproductive justice. So working with state legislators and state advocates to strengthen laws, to help build coalitions, power within the community and the survivor community in particular, to really kind of set out the demands of what needs to change and drive the narrative around that.
Very cool. I would love to hear just a little bit more about how you all came to be interested in the work that you do, or like how you knew it was the work that you wanted to be doing.
I can jump in. So freshman year, was assigned a roommate who was from Nashville, Tennessee, who was incredibly religious Methodist. She'd never been kissed. She'd never had a sip of alcohol. And I was like atheist Jew with a boyfriend, and we didn't know what to do with each other, but wound up living together all 4 years at Macalester. But she had a lot of questions about her body. Like, she had no sex ed of any kind. And she realized that I was comfortable talking about it. So one memorable night, she asked me where her vagina was, and we drew some diagrams, and I got out my copy of Our Body Ourselves. And I just realized all these incredible people I had met at Macalester had no education of any kind about their sexual well-being, and was really struck, even through senior year, the most amazing women I had met had no idea how their bodies worked. So I got really interested in sex ed, which is how I started in all of this, and served with AmeriCorps teaching sex ed, and then was horrified that in the week-long sex ed curriculum we were teaching, there was only 20 minutes about consent and healthy relationships, and a day about STIs. And yeah, I thought that didn't make sense, especially given my own experiences, my friends' experiences, just knowing how many people in my life had been harmed by sexual violence and gender-based violence. So then transitioned specifically more into the sexual violence prevention world, and did a lot of teaching in high schools and middle schools, sort of blending sex ed, healthy relationships, and sexual violence prevention. But yeah, for me, it was really just being inspired by the lack of knowledge all the smart Macalester people in my life had.
I can jump in. So after Macalester, shortly after Macalester, I ended up working for Congresswoman Betty McCollum. You all probably know, is representing Macalester's district in Congress. And at the time, she was very focused on global health issues and really gender within that context. And it was just like all these briefings I would go to, it was so clear that if we focus on women, everybody does better, economically, health-wise, all the indicators. And so I knew I wanted to have, I don't know, growing up in Minnesota, civil rights was always a focus in my family conversation. So I knew I wanted to have a civil rights career, and working for Betty really kind of anchored that gender focus. And when I went to law school, I went to Columbia, and they have a sexuality and gender law clinic, which was amazing. And this was at the time that there was a lot of debate around marriage equality, and you had states that were passing laws to provide for marriage equality, but then including large religious carve-outs in those laws. And so we did a lot of work that I didn't even know was lawyer work, writing letters to the legislature about why those exemptions were not needed, and doing press conferences and talking about coalition politics. And I just absolutely loved it, and loved that that could be part of having a law degree and being a lawyer. Wasn't just going to court. That's a piece of it as well. And some people really love that. Not so much me. But yeah, that experience with Betty and then in the clinic really anchored my focus on gender issues and discrimination broadly. But then when Me Too took off in the fall of 2017, like that completely changed my work. And there was just all of a sudden so much appetite to make change by policymakers around sexual harassment. And that was incredibly exciting. A lot of long days, sleepless nights, like working to meet that demand and make sure that legislators were not just kind of doing whatever, sounded good, but really working to change things in ways that help those most marginalized by harassment. And so my work the last, almost 4 years now has really been focused on harassment. And there's so much that needs to be done, I think, as we all know, in that space. And I'm so grateful for all those doing direct service work. And, my role as a policy person is try to create kind of legal and statutory infrastructures to both fund the direct service work, but also make sure that our incentives, both for schools and employers on the front end, are the right ones so that we're preventing harassment and assault from happening to begin with.
So I'll say kind of similarly, I went into law school interested in civil rights work. I grew up in St. Paul, going to St. Paul public schools. And so I always was like fortunate enough to have friends from a lot of different, racial backgrounds, cultural backgrounds. And I always thought, equity and diversity work was really important to me growing up. And so that's kind of what I wanted to focus on in law school. And I wasn't really sure if I wanted to, do that through like a criminal justice lens or some other way. But in law school, I really focused more on employment law work. And I found it really interesting, and also just thinking about the amount of time that everybody spends in their at the workplace and how important it is to have a healthy workplace. And then it was really starting practicing law that I started doing investigations, like workplace investigations, and I found that to be really kind of challenging and interesting because you really kind of use a lot of different skill sets where you need interviewing skills, interpersonal skills, as well as analytical and writing skills. I was an English major at McAllister, and so it's kind of a nice way to use those skills in terms of writing up reports. And there's a lot of it's really a writing intensive job that I have now. So anyway, after practicing, it led me to the university where we really focus heavily on either investigating or educating the community through like informal processes, but do a lot of investigations where we write up these lengthy reports sometimes that address what we find in investigations and in our analysis about whether or not there's been a policy violation of a university policy having to do with either discrimination or sexual misconduct. So it's been the job I'm in now has been really nice in a lot of ways, and the fact that I feel like I'm doing work that's important to me personally, that I feel like is important on a larger scale, and then also work that I find interesting and challenging, and then I work with a group of people that I really enjoy being around. So I think that that's helpful too in terms of figuring out where you want to work and who you want to be around. I think that's been really key to my enjoyment of where I'm at now.
So I was a political science major at McAllister, and I took civil rights and civil liberties. I think when I was a freshman, and I loved it. And I joined mock trial, and I wanted to be a lawyer so badly. And my sister is an abortion provider, so I think that's kind of why I was initially pulled to reproductive justice. And I spent, all 4 years and some years after Mac, like really dedicated to that. But I had an internal conflict because my heart also lied in WGSS and women and gender studies in the pursuit of intersectionality. And I kind of had this like moral dilemma where I couldn't get over how like categorical the law was, and how even though it was such a great way to advocate and I really saw myself doing it, it felt very like not humanistic in a way. So that's kind of why I ended up going to social work school first, so that I could get that more like micro, face-to-face skill set, and to really like expose myself to narratives and situations that I hadn't thought about. And I'm really glad that I went. I have to say, like at first I hated it because I was like, what am I doing here? But I loved it, and I think like social work school is a really great program. Here I am like now telling you all to go, but yeah, like I loved it, and it made me want to go to law school even more, which is why I applied. I applied this past winter. So I feel like with these two degrees, I'm kind of setting myself up for the work that I want to do, which is like in the intersection of this like macro level policy, but then also like knowing how to talk to people who have gone through a trauma. I mean, as a lawyer, like if you're talking to victims or survivors, whatever words you want to use, face to face, like you can make that experience really empowering, or you can make it really traumatizing. And I don't think that I don't think most careers really teach you how to do trauma informed work. And I'm really passionate about it. So I think, it was kind of like a moral obligation I had to make sure that I was like as prepared as I could be, especially because of the privilege that I have. And, like, sure, like really hard things have happened to me, but the kind of work that I was doing, I hadn't really ever experienced what I wanted to be advocating for. So yeah, that's how I got into it.
Awesome. A little more generally, I guess, I'm wondering what advice you might have for students still at McAllister who are maybe graduating soon. Like, what were your first career steps? What do you wish you had known, sort of maybe before entering your field?
Okay, I have something. I was so hyper focused on one, moving to New York, which was a very big move, and getting a job in reproductive justice. I was just like a maniac. I was like, I have to do this or else. And I wish that I had taken better care of myself. I think that, McAllister is a wonderful place, but it is very competitive. And I think it really breeds this kind of like perfectionist quality that I'm sure a lot of us have, which is great if it's honed properly. But I wish that I had just like taken better care of myself. And also like the job that I worked at was really a toxic environment, and I was so like desperate to just get my foot in the door that I didn't really think about, is this actually the right place for me right now where I'm at. And I also think like if you go into job interviews like caring about yourself, not just wanting to get the job, that will come across, and that will make you a better candidate in the long run. And I think it'll also just kind of gravitate you towards people who are probably gonna be better for your psyche and for your career moving forward. So I guess the advice I have is to try to like have a more holistic approach, and just know that like things will unfold as they unfold. Things are unpredictable, as we all have seen in the last year, and to just like be kind to yourself.
Hey, hey, come in here, buddy. Come in here. Good boy.
I think I have similar advice, which is looking back, I wish that I had known how much support I would have needed to do frontline direct service work with survivors of violence. And that I came from the world of sex ed, which was like really cushy in comparison, and felt so meaningful, and I was so invigorated by the students I was working with, and it was really like deeply nourishing. And then going into direct service provision was incredibly satisfying. And I felt like, I feel like we all come to McAllister because we have this like urge to help and do and like make the world a better place. And that was like thriving, and everything else was like collapsing because I just had no idea how hard it was going to be on like frontline trauma every day. And similarly to what Elizabeth said, like the rape crisis center where I worked was a hot mess and was run by a few white women who had no idea what racial equity was or how they were wringing dry their bilingual Spanish speaking staff. And it was just like truly a shit show. And I had no idea. So it was my first job in the field. And I was like, oh, trauma work is hard. And we have support group like every other week, and that's enough. And it's not. And so like if you're gonna do direct service work, first of all, I should have had a therapist just like in my own personal life. And I wish I had known that you need like actual supervision if you're doing trauma counseling, and place where, people talk about vicarious trauma and organizational vicarious trauma. But that stuff is really real, and that the nonprofit industrial complex is really good at like wringing excited young people dry, and then sending them off to grad school, which is the story of my life. And I think I wish I had known how much more support I needed personally and professionally to do that work. Because I definitely like hit a point where I was like, I can't do this anymore, and went to grad school. I have my master's in education, which was a great break and a good perspective learning experience. But I would not wish that learning on anyone else in that same way. But the other advice I would give, which is maybe unsolicited, is to not like, if you know what you want to do, that's really great. And like life is long and your 20s sort of last forever. And like, I took a meandering path and took a year off and traveled and like worked in the art world in New York. And it like still, I wound up in this place that I'm doing exactly what I want to be doing at 30. So I felt this like intense pressure of my graduating cohort of like, we're going to get jobs and we're all trying to move to New York or San Francisco or whatever. And that taking my time really was wise.
I would echo that as well. I think, the only thing I feel like I would regret early on in my career would be focusing too much on my next step, or like how I'm going to get to like where I want to be, instead of just kind of enjoying the position I'm in, where there might be less responsibility, or there might be things that, you don't have to worry about that you have to worry about later on in your career. Or I'm also one person that didn't know like exactly what position they wanted to be in. I took a more meandering path as well in terms of figuring out, what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do some work that reflected my values and I felt like was important, but it took different routes to get there. And I think just enjoying the journey as much as you can, and that's like easier said than done always, but just figuring out what would be a good place for you to be a good fit, whether it's an organization or like a supervisor that you feel like would be a good place to work, and you'll be able to learn a lot early on in your career, I think is important.
And I'll just add that I think taking a meandering journey could actually make you a better advocate in this space in the end, whether it's sexual assault or reproductive justice. These are really cross-cutting fields. Taking like reproductive justice as an example, if you just focus on healthcare, you're kind of missing the whole point of the movement, which is about economic justice, about housing justice, food justice, like all of these things. And so getting experiences in multiple different fields, I think, can help you kind of build, regardless, even if they seem very dissimilar and disorganized at the front end, they will all, I think, build into this this advocacy role. And I think, looking back, I wish I kind of had to let myself free of the constraints that I felt to go into a certain field and not try different experiences. And it's all about your ability to paint a narrative looking backwards. I'm like really skilled now, I feel like, in connecting all the dots to make it look like I had this grand plan, but I didn't necessarily. And if anything, I wish I had had more of a just kind of trying out a number of different things. I think it makes you such a better advocate. And it's not just the issues too, it's also the type of skills. And I work a lot with like survivor-led coalitions, and my skill set that I bring to the table is often doing the legislative drafting, the legislative analysis for their legislative work, but a large part of the work might be art advocacy and just healing through art. And that is just so important, and something I don't have much experience in. A lot of it is also just organizing, not just organizing, like going out and talking to workers, talking to survivors, building trust, building community. And that's the thing I think it's hard to learn in school. You're kind of best going out and doing it. And I think St. Paul offers a lot of opportunities to do it. I wish I had done more. That I did a lot of political campaigns, which was a lot of fun, but more issue and community focused organizing, I think would have made me even, I've learned it over the years, but would have loved to have more of a grounding in that, because that is so important, regardless of whether you end up as an attorney or a direct service provider. Having those multitude of experiences is important.
Absolutely. Since some of you kind of touched on this, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more specifically about like what strategies you do use to take care of yourself, and also maybe to recognize when a workplace or just an environment isn't actually good, or just isn't good for you, and sort of what that process is like.
I mean, I think I touched on this a little earlier, but I feel like working in a collaborative environment with people that you enjoy being around. Like oftentimes, we're in our office, we're dealing with heavy issues of other people's trauma and stress, and so it's just nice to be able to go talk to somebody else in the workplace about it and kind of get a perspective, and be able to talk with them and be open, and know that you're gonna get support from that person, and that it's someone that you feel comfortable with, that is coming from a good place, and someone that you trust, and also I think someone that is good at their work. Because I think in order to be challenged and enjoy your work, I think you have to be around people that are good at what they do, and that they feel like what they do is important. And so I think that's all a big piece for me in terms of taking care of myself, is being in a good space, a good workplace. But then also just, the typical stuff of making sure you're doing time for yourself and getting exercise and stuff like that. Yeah, I think those all kind of play a role in my life.
I guess I think, for everybody, we all need different things for like our ego and our sense of self. But I think having multiple areas of your life that build you up and make you feel good about yourself, whether that be like work and a hobby and friends, or like I have a cat, she makes me feel lovely, just like just gathering up these things, because especially if you're committing to doing this kind of work, whether you're working with people individually or you're kind of doing more macro level, it is hard, and it's like violent in a way to continue to read all of these things about how messed up our system and our world is, and how it doesn't treat people well, and all this stuff. Like, it really gets to you. And I think something that I realized was that I wanted to create this sense of control. Like, I could go in and I could help people, and I could, I'd have the words and stuff, but that's not really how it works. Like, people get to decide what they need from you at any given time. Even when you're an advocate, it's up for them to tell you what they need and what they want. And sometimes that can be like disappointing if that's not the goal that you had. But I think getting to a place where you can let go of that and be like, well, that's not the point. The point is for me to just like be here for you, and for me to deal with whatever I think I need from this somewhere else. And I think like just building up as many supports as you can for yourself will make you more present in this work, and it will make you so much more open. So, get a therapist, number one. You can telehealth, all the rage. yeah, just like don't be, I mean, I think, you know, it's so much better even from 4 years ago, like the way that we're able to just like destigmatize talking about mental health. I think the pandemic has actually made it less taboo. And that's great, and like take advantage of that for sure.
Yeah, I think this is a really important and really difficult question to answer. For me, I mean, the first thing is that I developed a daily yoga practice when I was an advocate and trauma counselor, and that was really important to me, to have space set aside every day to be in, like, work, felt very safe at the studio, and just getting to be with my body, and it was really like healing and lovely. And I think there was some point for me in terms of trying to figure out, like, how do you know if a workplace is a good fit for you? There was some point where I realized that my life had become two categories, which was work and like recovering from work. And I think that self-care is really important and should be something that we're like actively thinking about. And that for me, I hit a point where I realized everything that I was doing was actively self-care, and that my life was just like working or caring enough for myself so that I could work. And that's when I had this sort of like alarm bell where I was like, this is not what I want my life to feel like or look like. I want to be able to just like have a Saturday instead of be like, okay, I have to do yoga, and then I have to go outside because that makes me feel good, and I have to eat vegetables because that makes me feel good. And like it was becoming more energy than made sense for me. And I think in terms of, it's hard to like suss out if a place is going to be a good fit. I think now I've gained skills about the interview process. For example, this job I have now is the most trauma-informed place I've ever worked, and I'm just obsessed with my coworkers. But in the interview, some of the questions they asked me, like the director of the Division of Violence Prevention, in my final interview asked, like, you don't have to share your personal beliefs about defunding the police, but like, can you speak to how you would navigate this role where you're serving survivors who are working with law enforcement, and also working with these organizations who are really against law enforcement, and like, how would you navigate that? And that was like a big green flag for me, that people in this role were thinking about how we have conflicting opinions and views and understanding of law enforcement. And if we're serving survivors of color, like, how is that impacting our jobs and their lives? And in my job, I do have to work closely with police. So I think, yeah, I've gotten better now at looking out for those sort of green flag questions in interviews. And that I always ask now in job interviews about how they support their staff and how they model trauma-informed care within their own workplace, and what they're actively doing to prevent burnout. And that might feel a little scary to ask, like kind of aggressive, but actually people who know they should be doing that are then impressed that you know that they should be doing that. Like, I think it makes for a stronger interview, even though it can feel a little scary. And you can kind of tell when someone is just making up an answer and they're like, oh, you know, we have happy hour sometimes. You're like, that is not going to meet my needs to do direct service care for survivors of violence, right? So I'd say that it's hard to learn all in advance, but that paying attention to the kinds of questions interviewers are asking you can help you suss out like how much they're actually walking the walk instead of just talking the talk of caring for their staff.
I love that. I love those questions. So for me, so these are really demanding jobs. You know, it's the kind of job where there's always more work that can be done. And I think a lot of us feel really emotionally invested when you're directly helping people in really bad situations. It's hard to kind of shut off. And I realized over the years that even like growing up, that I have always been really time and productivity focused. Like that's how I measured my value. And, you know, I always thought if I just work more, I would get ahead. And that was sort of my key to being better at things. And I've definitely had a lot of reckoning over the years of, you know, and realization of how that's very much my embodiment of white supremacy. Yeah, coming to terms with that, and like realizing that it wasn't just harming myself, but, you know, people that I supervise, if I was so time and productivity focused, and, you know, and to be doing that in the civil rights environment, was just particularly harmful. So have been doing a lot of work and echo the therapists and coaches and everything to kind of help talk through that. And a lot of our nonprofit industrial complex embodies that as well, like that white supremacy. And so I think, yeah, Tim, is the questions that Emma asked in interviews are such important ones and great ones to kind of suss out to what extent an organization really is committed to having a workplace that is not only one that we can survive as employees, but one that actually truly advances the movement because they're doing the work internally and not just externally.
Something that I'll add also, don't be afraid to like reach out to people. Like, even if you don't know them, even if you stalk them on LinkedIn. Like, I know that like Macalester has different like alumni Facebook groups for whatever city, like utilize those, reach out to people. If you're thinking about applying to a job somewhere and you like tangibly know someone who worked there, just ask them what their experience is. I feel like, sometimes just talking to people who've actually worked there, it's more information about what you're getting yourself into than you could ever like glean from a job interview. And I actually got my first job through a Macalester alumni who did warn me that it was very toxic, but I still did it anyway. So I knew what I was getting myself into. So I can't even complain about it. But like, but just knowing helped, and having someone that I could check in with and be like, I'm being gaslit every day. And she was like, you are. And I was like, okay. Just like reach out to your network. I mean, like we all want you to succeed. So people love it when you reach out to them and they're like, tell me about your experience. We love that. So just do it.
I think that's great advice. And you all are proof that, alum will come back and do the work. So thank you all. Switching gears a little bit to a question that's entirely selfish and for my own benefit. I'm thinking about law school post-grad, and I want to hear a little bit more about, for those of you who attended or are planning to attend, what your thought process was there. Like, do you think you did it at the right time? Sort of anything related to that decision that you made and how you're feeling about it now.
I talked about it a little bit. I mean, I haven't gone yet, but I will say that I didn't take the route that I thought I was going to take. I took time off and I did a different program first. And I've applied to night programs, which isn't something that I ever considered at my time at Macalester. So that's going to enable me to, one, my first year course load I'll have a little more time to do it. And two, I can now work during the day as a social worker if I want to, or just any sort of part-time job. So like that structure I realized would probably fit better for me and my goals, and just knowing that is an option. Because I didn't like think about it when I was graduating. I wanted to do the day program like right away. And I'm really glad that I like opened myself up to that flexibility and like without that preconceived notions of I'm like doing it wrong. I think like if you want to go, that won't change in 2 or 3 years. If you still want to go in 2 or 3 years, then you can go in 2 and 3 years and it'll be great. So just like, I think there's a lot of pressure to just like do it right away because you like lose steam. I remember people telling me that that's not true. Your LSATs are good for years. Okay. I took my LSAT in 2016 and I just applied and it was fine. So it's all good.
Yeah, I think the more perspective you have going into law school, the better, just because if you really don't know what you want to do with your law degree, it can make it a little more stressful going through school, like trying to figure out what you want to do, and then also dealing with all the materials that you have to deal with in law school. I mean, I feel like I courses and stuff a lot. Some people don't, but I think it just depends on what you like, what you enjoy learning. But yeah, I feel like having perspective about what you want to do, I think allows you to enjoy it more. I think if anything, I probably could have taken more time off in between undergrad and law school to really focus on what I want to do with my law degree. One thing I am glad I did was that my older sister who went to law school, and she did like the typical, like worked for a big law firm for a while. And I saw what that life was like when I was in law school, and I knew I didn't want like any part of that. Like I saw what working 70 to 80 hours a week was like. And, working in like corporate law where you're really working on defense side litigation, and, working like feels like you're doing like important work sometimes. So I knew I wanted to avoid that, which is really helpful. A lot of people I work with now in my office actually worked for big law firms and ended up at a town line office because they wanted more work-life balance. So anyway, I think just having perspective entering law schools.
I'll make the same point. I took 3 years off, and I'm very grateful I did, and I feel like even more could have been better. But yeah, law school is law school industrial complex too. It really kind of funnels you into really traditional areas of law, like big law, or just litigating at all. Policy is not discussed as much, and yeah, like I went to law school, I worked in the Hill, I wanted to go right back to the Hill. I knew I wanted to do policy work. And I feel like a large reason I was able to stick to that and go into this work afterwards was because I had taken 3 years off and seen what it's like, and really anchored myself in that world. And if I hadn't, I think it would be just so easy to, I just saw so many people who, when I talked to them, the first few weeks of law school, they're like, yeah, I want to do this great public interest thing or public service thing. And then like so quickly went off into corporate law, which you can then go into public interest law afterwards. It's not like that seals your life in that direction, but I think it can be a pretty limiting environment, both just the culture and then also the debt that you leave with. That was a big thing too. I'm fortunate that my law school had a loan repayment program for those that go into public interest law, so that made it possible. But taking that time, to the extent you can save some money as well in that time before you go to law school, that can help you stay on the path that you want to go.
Yeah, I was going to say that too. Like I feel like the more debt you take on, the more likely you are to take some job that you might not enjoy just because it's going to pay you the most. So I think really being mindful of that going into law school, and what kind of opportunities you can have, whether it's, scholarships or whatever.
That's great advice. Thank you. Were you going to say something? Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I didn't go to law school, but I'll just shout out that yes to taking time before grad school. If you are like, I don't know, because I kind of want to, but I'm not sure. Like I took 7 years before I got my master's in education, and I'm really glad that I did.
Elizabeth, did you have anything to add?
No, I mean, more just like no degree can ever define you. I think that they try to, kind of what Andrea was saying about the like industrial complex, like they certainly try to define you and what you stand for and who you are, but they can't do that. And I think that kind of, it's so like fun, I think, to go to grad school and be like, this is who I am now, this is what I'm doing, and these are the things. But I think if you can like resist that as much as possible, it'll actually make that experience so much more valuable to you. Yeah.
Awesome. I think that's about all the questions I have for you all. Before I open it up to audience questions, is there anything else you want to get in there? I think that my questions didn't cover. Anything you want to plug? Feel free to do that now.
I guess I just feel like we've been talking so much about like how to not have a horrible job and like how to not, but I just like, we're all here because we like absolutely love doing this work. And I don't want to have any of you be like scared off. Like this is deeply fulfilling, incredibly important work. And we need more people working in this field. So while we have been like giving words of wisdom, perhaps, like also know that there is lots of enthusiasm and excitement, and I would not be doing anything else except this. So just wanted to throw that out there.
All right. Do any of you want to add anything else, or should we move into some audience questions? All right. If anyone has a question, feel free to unmute yourself or maybe use the raise hand function and we can call on you. But it's a pretty small group, so you might just be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
hi. Thank you all again so much for your time coming today. My question for you all is that I know that many of you have a background in law school and doing legal work. And Elizabeth, a comment that you said earlier that stuck to me is like, it's very true in that the legal system in many ways has not been humanistic in terms of how it treats like survivors in court and how it can often re-traumatize them. I was wondering, based off of your experiences, like doing legal work and or your sexual advocacy work, as to how do you feel that the legal system as it currently stands could be better for victims in terms of still upholding like justice, but yet not re-traumatizing them in any kind of means and treating them with more dignity and respect?
I love that question. And I'm also going to plug like social work. I think, or just like victim advocacy, like in general, because I mean, it's true that if you are a lawyer, you know, your job may not always align with like counseling a victim in that way. Your job is different. It's to protect their rights and you have a different kind of agenda. And I think it can come across as cold sometimes. But having more people there who are there just for the victims and only care about them and their well-being and what they need right then and now, and kind of doing like briefing like before, during, and after, I think that could help. But also like reading, for me, feminist theory, feminist legal theory, critical feminist theory, all of that, having that as kind of a backbone and as your armor really helps, because it really pinpoints the language that you can use to make it more humanistic and inclusive, and also like how you can take care of yourself in the system. So those are the two things: feminist theory and social work.
And I'll add,
I would.
you can use a legal degree and law to try to make the law more humanistic and better. And two examples that kind of pop into my mind are, one, a lot of our, speaking from the workplace context, so like your Title VII civil rights type laws that saying employers can't discriminate against you at work. So many of those, when it comes to harassment especially, are really conceptualizing of survivors as white cis women. And the way the laws have been interpreted really don't take into account intersectional harassment, you know, being harassed based on, for example, your race and sex combined, and that, you know, that the unique harassment that is experienced based on that identity. And so a lot of my work is working to try to change the statutes so they are more all-encompassing and reflective of how harassment is actually experienced by so many people. And then another big thing is just recognizing that a system that just depends on survivors kind of putting their neck out there to bring a claim to make change is not one that is going to ultimately work, because there are just so many things that keep survivors from reporting harassment. And we really need to be focused on those survivors, those most marginalized by harassment, those who are fearful of reporting, that don't have financial resources to access the lawyer, or even just, you know, make a complaint because they might lose their job. And what can we do to make sure we have laws that require employers to do certain things to begin with? You know, one example that was really popular right after Me Too really took off was training employers and employees about harassment to stop it. And there's lots of research showing it's not always effective, especially in the way that it's done currently, but, you know, looking at other incentives that we can create through law, like transparency requirements, to sort of shine a light on what employers are doing, or audit them and pay closer attention to what they're doing, so they can't just sweep harassment under the rug, and know that they really need to be proactive in addressing this and in creating a culture, a safe culture, an inclusive culture in their workplaces. So you can use the law on that end as well to make change.
Yeah, it's similar in a lot of ways to what I was going to say. I think one of the things, in our office that's nice is working with like a community that's on an ongoing basis where, at like a law firm or in the legal system, usually you're involved with parties, for one matter, and then it's done. You don't see them again, or you might do like an investigation, you give a report, and then you don't see whether the workplace is actually changing, whether they're implementing any, changes that are going to, mitigate or hopefully avoid situations like this in the future. So, one of the things that's nice about working at like the University of Minnesota in our office is that we're considered an impartial party, so it makes it difficult sometimes because we have to balance, being impartial with also like being empathetic and understanding that people are in really difficult positions when they come to our office. But it also is nice that you're not have to advocate for one side and you're not looking at things like from just one perspective, that you can actually try to look at things more holistically and try to create more holistic change. And so, I mean, our policies are more of like a smaller microcosm where we're looking at, just the University of Minnesota and its community and trying to make it a more positive place for people to work in and try to, prevent sexual misconduct from occurring and try to make a good place to be a student, be an employee. So it's kind of okay.
Awesome. I think this will probably be our last question. It's the one in the chat from Rebecca. Thank you. So how do you or could you incorporate anti-racism and gender affirmation into your work?
Yeah, that's a big part of my work. And I'm trying to think, how do I summarize like all that we do to answer this question? But in every training that we lead about, for example, we do, it's like 4-hour training on supporting survivors of domestic violence for people who are not DV advocates, but who say answer work for homeless services and get calls of people needing shelter because of DV situations. That anytime we're talking about trauma-informed care, we're always centering anti-racist lens, a health equity lens, so that we don't just talk about trauma as interpersonal trauma, but always mentioning historical and intergenerational trauma and systems level trauma. And if you are someone answering the phone at homeless services, like how are you representing the state who has done generations of harm to all different communities that you serve? And trying to get people in different kinds of roles more aware of how they are holding power and how the systems that they're representing are holding power. And thinking about trying to, we talk a lot about the differences between equality and equity as like a framework for folks when we do trainings, that tailoring services to people is really smart and necessary thing to do, and not expecting that people have the same skills and experiences. And we also think about anti-racism in terms of how we support healing, that there's a lot of language in the field about like, regardless of your gender identity or like regardless of your cultural background, but we try to really center that, like how can your gender identity be a source of your healing, or how can your cultural background, your language be a centerpiece of your healing, and how are we as providers not putting our assumptions and beliefs onto you, right? Like, oh, that's not what being sad looks like, or that's a weird grieving ritual, right? But to be totally trying to support people and letting go of their own background and becoming more aware of what they're bringing unintentionally into their work, and thinking about really supporting people's identities as the foregrounds for their own healing and resilience. And so, yeah, I think there's no such thing as trauma-informed care that isn't explicitly anti-racist as well, and that gender and all different sorts of identities can also and should also be centered in that. And I think that one thing I love about my work is that it feels really like cutting edge in that way. There's not a lot of people who are doing that in the field that explicitly. I should say as government bodies, right? Like I work for the city of Boston, and I feel really grateful that the city sort of is taking on this lens. There's a lot of on the ground people who've been doing this work in that way for a long time. But I feel really excited, especially sort of in this last year, that a lot of different kinds of organizations are trying to pick up this anti-racist and gender affirming work in a different way. Feel grateful to be a part of. And I think there's also always more to do on that front as well.
Yeah, I think it was mentioned earlier, just the intersectionality of this work and with the work that I do, it's just so important to recognize it. And I mean, one of the things that's nice about our office too is that we're located in the Office of Equity and Diversity at the university, where some talent offices like report to the general counsel. We report to the vice president of equity and diversity. So I think that allows us to, have more tools in addressing some of these issues where, we partnered with the Gender and Sexuality Center at the university to put forth the first gender expression and identity policy at the university. And there's not a lot of them nationwide. And so we're pretty proud of putting, I mean, it seems like necessary and it seems, pretty basic, but we're able to put that together and with the partners in our department. And then also, since last summer, since the murder of George Floyd, there's just been a lot of people coming to our office with issues of discrimination or concerns of discrimination. I think a lot of times it's just people that have been putting up with things that they no longer feel like they need to put up with anymore. And so we're trying to figure out ways of how to deal with some of these like more like micro aggressive type conduct that gets reported and ways that, sometimes it's kind of like a Minnesota culture where people are not directly racist, but they go about it in an indirect way. And how do we address that? And how do we make, like the University of Minnesota a good place to work if you're a Black person, a person of color, and how do we make sure we're keeping talented people here and not leaving? So it's all complicated and I think really important, but something that we have a long way to go on, I think.
I'll just add quickly, we've done a lot of work over the years really thinking about what it means to center women of color, queer and trans people, and do so in a way that's not just saying that, like we center them, but to really focus. I mean, one way we're doing this is to really focus on funding. As a national organization that has more resources, when we're working with state partners or other partners, like where is our funding going? And when we talk about centering survivors and the solutions need to be coming from, the survivors need to be driving the narrative around harassment and what solutions are needed. How do we actually make that happen through our helping fund those organizations? So making sure that, looking very much and partnering with queer and trans led and focused groups and BIPOC groups and providing them funding, since historically those groups have been very under-resourced, and what can we do to help address that through our funding?
Yeah, and I'll just quickly echo, let people tell you who they are and let people tell you what they need. And I think that can be, translated into a variety of different ways depending on what your job is and who you work for. But like, that's a big thing that I think I've taken away from this grad program is that, we have diagnoses, we have labels, and those can be functional and helpful only so far. But you're never the expert on somebody else's story or experience. And just creating the space for them to tell you and being either that trusted institution, that trusted person, that's really like what it's about. It's just creating the space for people to tell you, and then for you to have the power to kind of like do something about it. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you all again so much for being here, and thank you to everyone who attended and for your questions. I think that's all we have for right now. I saw that Tony just dropped in the chat a little survey for any people who attended to just fill that out. That would be awesome. Yeah, and if we can get another like round of applause or thumbs up or something for our panelists, that would be great. Awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Yes, thank you all so much for joining. Thank you, students, for your engagement. And thank you, Thea, for moderating a wonderful panel. I'll stop the recording now, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.